Everything you need to know about products and services that can improve your life. This is Experts on Call on CL 650.
And welcome back. My name's Tony Giovento. I'm the host of Talk About Strata. And we have Veronica Franco from Clark Wilson, a lawyer who does Strata work, and Shannon Salter, the chair of the Civil Resolution Tribunal, in the studio. And it's, I don't know if an hour just hasn't even scratched the surface. We could have talked about all kinds of scenarios and things that we're going to probably deal with in the coming years as the tribunal starts to get implemented. But one more email, Veronica.
Sure.
We were joking that you weren't going to talk anymore, but we're going to have to make you do it anyway. So we have a strata that has a bylaw, and we see quite a few of these bylaws around the province that owners have to provide personal information, including things like email addresses, emergency family contact information, personal insurance information, employer information. And an owner has actually emailed in and say that they can't find anywhere that the strata has the authority to do it, and they are refusing to provide some of the personal information. And the strata is obviously threatening to fine them, to enforce bylaws, do things like that. So this comes up to the whole issue of whether a bylaw is enforceable or not. So, you know, where do we go for the owner and then maybe for the strata?
Well, when it comes to collecting personal information, a strata corporation is bound by the Personal Information Protection Act. And that sets limits on the kinds of personal information that can be collected. And in essence, it's what's reasonable to provide the services that the strata corporation provides. So it's probably reasonable to request an email address if, for example, that's a primary communication tool that the strata corporation provides in giving notices, for example, or phone numbers. Certainly an owner can't dispute that they would want to be contacted immediately if there is water rushing into their unit on an emergency basis. So there has to be a reasonable basis for requiring that kind of personal information. I question the reasonableness of requiring an employer's information, for example. But in all of that, the Personal Information Protection Act requires a strata corporation to develop a policy that all of the owners consent to. And under the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner has said that it's sufficient consent to pass your privacy policy as a bylaw. And that constitutes consent. And one of the things that the strata corporation can provide is if an owner refuses to provide the personal information that is necessary under the policy, is that they can provide what the consequences would be for not providing that information. So, for example, if you don't provide emergency contact information to the strata corporation, and that is required under the privacy policy, one of the possible consequences that the strata corporation may have is that they can't contact the owner in an emergency, and that could result in additional damages and not receiving services correctly. So essentially all of this is really guided through the Personal Information Protection Act, and the strata corporation has to comply with all of that. Most of the time, many strata corporations don't have these privacy policies, and that's generally the first step in making sure that people understand why they're giving out this personal information and what the strata corporation is going to be doing with that personal information and who it can disclose that personal information to.
Well, and the bigger issue is their duty to protect that information
Absolutely.
once they've collected it, because invariably, and we see this just on emails that get emailed to one of our offices across the province, or where there's a complaint, is that email address is then used as a bulk email address and emailed to all of the other owners and all the other users in the complex without people's consent. So, you know, how that information is managed and used is a significant part of this relationship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a strata corporation that goes through the process of developing a policy, a privacy policy, they start to understand what information they're allowed to collect and how they can use that information. And I think it's what often happens, for example, the example I see that happens most often is a strata council member. They're receiving correspondence from owners, and so they have access to an owner's email address, but then they're now no longer on council, but they've kept all these email addresses and now start using the email addresses for just collect signatures to demand a meeting, or for some other reason that's unrelated to the strata corporation. The fact that the owner is no longer on council means that they shouldn't be accessing that personal information anymore. They don't have the permission of the owner to contact them outside of their duties as a council member. But going through the privacy policy and coming up with that policy should help the owners understand how they're supposed to be using that and how they're supposed to be protecting it.
And for the listeners, the Condominium Homeowners Association website, choa.bc.ca, has a guide that was developed in conjunction with the Privacy Commissioner, and it explains how strata corporations use, collect, administer information, what their privacy policies should look like, how they manage the documents and information. So it's a good guide to download as we're going forward. So Shannon, this comes to another side of tribunal, and the whole other side of the legislation is, so what if we end up with a bylaw that may or may not necessarily be enforceable? Does the tribunal have the authority to deem whether a bylaw itself is, under the law, is actually an enforceable bylaw?
Yes, that's right, it does. The tribunal has the authority to be able to interpret the act, interpret legislation, and interpret bylaws, and determine whether bylaws are enforceable. So again, this is within the wide scope of governance issues that the CRT can help to resolve disputes involving those kinds of issues.
Okay. Oh, excellent. You have a website that for information for listeners.
Now, this website is not up and running right now, but we're hoping for it to be up and running in a couple of weeks.
So you don't have a website, but you have a website.
We have an implementation website. We have a website that is about to come into being, much like the child, due November 15th. I hope it'll be similarly born around then. The address is www.civilresolutionbc.ca. That's www.civilresolutionbc.ca. Now, I should be clear, this isn't the tribunal's website. You can't go there and use the tribunal.
Right.
The tribunal won't be operational probably until later in 2015, but this website will provide more information about the CRT, how it will operate, and will also give updates on where we are with implementation, and equally importantly, provide the public with a way to give us feedback and ask us questions too.
Right. So it's just a great place for public information about what's transforming within our justice system, basically.
Yes, that's the intention.
Oh, excellent. Veronica, thank you very much for your wisdom and your intelligence and your comments as always.
Try. Thank you.
If you, the listeners, have more questions, if you'd like an email responded to, you can email us at questions@talkaboutstrata.com. My name is Tony Giaventu, and I'm the host of 6050 Sea Isles Talk About Strata.